Yes,
Have we
we are
started the
recording.
recording?
Yep. Yes, we
Awesome.
have.
All right, it didn't show up on my screen yet. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. My name is Akua Ellis, for those I haven't yet had a chance to meet, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Community Impact at the Greater Twin Cities United Way. I want to thank you for joining us today for an informative conversation with senior leaders of several critical state agencies. The impetus for today's webinar was the desire to act on what we heard from many of our nonprofit partners. The COVID-19 pandemic has created tremendous disruption for all of us over the past several months. And while we know that the Walls administration has worked round the clock to share timely information, help making sense of what new guidance and regulations mean for on-the-ground operations was something that our partners identified as a need, especially for nonprofits whose work places them firmly at the intersection of multiple agency efforts. Are you all able to hear me? I'm getting an echo. Okay. This event provides an opportunity for our panelists to answer your questions and provide practical guidance for many of the new COVID-19 regulatory requirements. We provided a summary of the many agency-related questions and concerns that you've raised with your program officers over the recent months with our panelists. So our speakers will be sharing direct responses to these issues as well as answering during the Q&A session at the end of the program. So start thinking about your questions now if they're not addressed during the presentation. I'd also like to express a sincere thank you to each of our agency leaders for joining us here today. We were chatting a moment ago. Things are crazy for everyone right now, and they could have been doing a number of other things. And so we're just really grateful to have leaders at their level here willing to devote some time and energy to demystifying things on behalf of our partners in our community. So with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Leslie Wright, who will provide an overview of today's program and introduce our speakers.
Thanks so much, Akua. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Wright, and I'm the Director of External Engagement at Greater Twin Cities United Way. I wanted to thank you for your time and your commitment to the community, the organizations you represent, and to our friends from the state of Minnesota. Before we get started, I wanted to go over just a couple of housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded so that we could put it on our website as well as in our newsletter for future use. Please put yourself on mute and turn your video off during the presentation. Please turn your Thank you. Please turn your phones on mute. We understand there may be many questions today and throughout the session. Therefore, we may need to prioritize them due to limited time. If you have any questions, please use the chat, which will be monitored and indicate who the question should be directed to. If someone has asked a question that you like and you see it in the chat, please use the like button, and this will allow us to prioritize the questions better. Anthony Bass will announce your question during the Q&A at the end of the session. If we run out of time, we will make sure your questions are sent to the appropriate panelist and get a response to you as soon as possible. The session today will be included in the next newsletter that is going to be sent on August 5th. Newsletters, by the way, are now sent on a monthly basis. Lastly, we know there's a big announcement today at 2 o'clock, so we will try to end just a couple of minutes early so that people can see the presentation. I'll go through the agenda. The welcome and opening remarks were already done by Akua Ellis, and I am doing the house notes right now. We will be joined today by three esteemed members of the state. Ryan Baumtrog, the Assistant Commissioner for Minnesota Housing, Hamza Warfa, the Deputy Commissioner for Deed, and Nikki Farrago, who's the Assistant Commissioner at DHS. Once they conclude their presentations, We will have a question and answer session that is going to be moderated by Anthony Bass. And again, as I just indicated, please use the chat so that you can put your questions in there. And then Kristen Rosenberger will close us out and the session will be concluded. So once I conclude right now, Ryan Baumtrog will take over, and that will be the next voice you hear. Enjoy.
Well, hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for the warm introduction. And I can't think of a better spot to be right now. My phone is on mute. I might have a 5-year-old walk up those stairs at some point during the conversation, but thanks for having me. I'm Ryan Baumtrog. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Policy at Minnesota Housing. Happy to chat with you about what the administration's focusing on for housing. On the next slide, I wanted to talk about Minnesota housing and our response to COVID so far, and talk a little bit about what we're still working on, because there's a lot more work to do. So our focus really with the Walz administration during at the beginning of the pandemic was almost a week or two after, was working on the governor's executive order that paused evictions and writs of recovery regarding home ownership. And that was a really key step to help people know that they could stay home when they were being asked to stay at home, and is viewed as being really critical to housing stability and keeping people where they are. The thing that we've been also working on since March and are currently underway at the agency, and have received a lot of output from many people on this call about the program, is the COVID Housing Assistance Program. And that's a program that is $100 million. I'll talk more about it in just a little bit, but was really informed and shaped by the questions that partners sent from across the state early in March, when they were trying to gather what the impacts were and what was going to be needed in community. I always think about housing. You know, we came into this pandemic in a really fragile spot for families. Housing is typically the #1 expense that people have. And we had over around 150,000 households that their incomes are less than 50,000, and they pay more than 50% of their income on rent. And so we were really unstable and fragile going into the pandemic. And I think the pandemic is showing just how fragile and broken our housing system was. So I'll share a little bit more about the COVID Housing Assistance Program in a little bit. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we know the $100 million is a great first step, and it'll help stabilize some families and help pay bills. But we know that there are housing challenges and abilities, further challenges to people paying their rent and mortgages as this continues and the economic recovery looks slow and the job market looks tough and unemployment insurance runs out, which I know you'll hear from Hamzi about. So we at Minnesota Housing know that there's a lot going on, and all of our work is done through community partners and nonprofits and local government entities. So we've tried our best to organize all of our information on a COVID-19 website, and I put the link here that you can click on. I also appreciate that Minnesota Housing isn't the only housing agency putting out information and passing laws and changing things. And so we're trying to the extent we can, to also pull in what's happening at the federal level, specifically like on the federal evictions moratorium and how that relates to and ties to what the state is doing. So there are some things that really try to walk through what the state is doing, what the federal government is doing all around housing. And then I did include, I'm happy to answer any questions, but included a link to the frequently asked questions to our housing assistance program, but hopefully we'll answer as many questions as I can today. On the next slide, thanks to the support of many people on the phone, we were able to secure, just actually this week, we received the $100 million. So we're really kicking it in full gear, that we're calling the COVID Housing Assistance Program. And it's a $100 million program in housing assistance that's focusing initially on paying unpaid housing bills to help stabilize households, prevent evictions, displacement, and homelessness. So there's a lot of other things happening in housing, and there's a lot of other things happening around addressing people sleeping outside and in encampments. But this is the program that the state is setting up to really acknowledge that bills have been stacking up since March, and there haven't been enough resources to help people pay their bills. So we've helped stabilize their housing, but haven't had a great program to help pay the bills. And that's what this program is intended to do, to help pay unpaid bills. So I imagine many of you on the phone might, or on the Microsoft Teams have applied. We are currently going through 151 applications for the program and reviewing and scoring and moving quickly towards selections. Our goal is to select administrators within the next few weeks so that a program could launch in middle of August for individuals and families to apply statewide to a range of local administrators, so hopefully more than one local administrator per region, to have several options to pay housing bills. And we are really focusing on housing related bills. So we think of rent and mortgage payments, but also utility bills and manufactured home lot rents. And we're really taking an expansive view on housing related bills. This is a new program. We made a decision not to go through an existing program, which I think is providing opportunities for us to partner with new nonprofits in ways that Minnesota Housing never has, to try and reach communities and people disproportionately impacted by housing and also disproportionately impacted by COVID in ways that the agency never has. So we're trying something new. Please bear with us as we work on this new thing, because I think it would have been easier for us just to do what we had done before and pick a program that we've been running for years, but we knew that we needed to do something different just to address the state that we're in and the state that households are in, and thinking about streamlining a process and streamlining access to the critical resources. So I do want to acknowledge that the program design and timing is really predicated around the moment we are. The urgency is on, I think 400,000 individuals are going to lose an extra $600 per week. And so we know that people have been struggling to pay their bills already. And we know for many families, it's only going to get worse as we head into the fall. And so we're really trying to get this program up and running and available across the state in as easy and as quickly determined eligibility as possible, so that we can stabilize families as quickly as possible. So I'll stop there and hand it over to the next presenter.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay? Wonderful. Good afternoon. I first want to start by thanking the Greater Twin Cities United Way for organizing this wonderful virtual meeting. It's often, the communication, the meetings that really make the biggest difference as we share, information and provide feedback to each other on ways that we can improve, the work that we are all engaged. And so I'm with the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And as the agency tasked with growing the economy, you can imagine it has been action-packed 4 months and a half for us, and really grateful for the partnerships and working closely with our community providers, our philanthropic partners, and our other agencies. And so as the agency, we have, most of you know that we have two divisions, the workforce division and economic development, housed under one, department. And so since March, we have been engaged both with unemployment insurance programs, as well as, small business support programs to respond in a rapid response to COVID-19. Clearly, the numbers, as you can see, close to 900,000 people applied or reactivated their accounts. As of last week, we have, I think, 430,000 people on UI. And the numbers, disproportionately impact Black, Indigenous, and people of color. 50% of Black people on the workforce labor participation are UI applicants benefiting from the UI system. And so this undisplaced, workers disproportionately are people of color. 40% are indigenous and American Indian. We have 28% Asian American, 28% Latino, and so as the program, as the displacement impacts, particular communities, we were very intentional in how we are reaching out and making sure that the services and programs available at DEED is one that people are aware of and that people are, communicating with us because, in February, we were at a 1.6 billion, surplus or funding available for our UI system. And as of last week, we are over $5 billion disbursement in payments from UI system. So clearly, the infrastructure and the system was not in a position to respond to such a drastic change. Nevertheless, we were one of the first states that implemented the federal UI programs, both the federal pandemic unemployment insurance, as well as the federal pandemic assistance program. And the difference between the two is PUA is intended, for self-employed contractors. We have over 100,000 people now, beneficiaries that are under that program. And then we have the federal, the names sound similar in a bit, Federal Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. And that program allows us to extend unemployment benefits for additional 13 weeks for Minnesotans who are eligible but already spent their 26 weeks. So 100% paid by federal, by the feds. We're able to extend unemployment benefit for additional 13 weeks for those who do not have time left, on their state benefits. And, it's really important because I know a lot of communities that, were unemployed to begin with or underemployed. So when COVID hit, it was kind of, double hit for a lot of community members. So having that extension really meant critically providing needed payments to community members. I want to talk about a little bit about engagement because, our perspective and, as someone who has spent quite a bit of time on the community building side, authentic partnership is, what makes successful government service delivery. And so over the last, since March, we have been organizing community meetings, weekly meetings, virtual meetings, as well as, connecting with our community partners on webinars and other ways in which we can provide, information on services, but also really get feedback. Because I can tell you, a number of the feedback we have received has meant, significant improvements in our processes and our work. And so that has been a big part of it. What we have also transitioned, one of the things that, as someone who leads on the workforce system, I can tell you one big struggle in any government, whether it's our state government or other states, is the digital transformation that our workforce system needs. And so I think, crises provide opportunities. And this was an example where Career Force services, so we have 50 different locations, what used to be called job centers, and now it's called Career Force. And so this has given us an opportunity to look at virtual services. So since the pandemic started, we've been doing a virtual career fair every week, connecting job seekers and employers. And at the same time, we were able to pivot to remote services. And this is where I'm referring to the digital divide. Not everyone had laptops and iPads and iPhones, to access services for, whether it's training programs or, simple things like, resume building or job counseling, career exploration. So what we have done is blended services that are remote, but not all virtual, not all digital, I should say. So for example, we were doing one-on-one counseling via phone, so people could still call our offices, and create for centers and get that one-on-one counseling by phone. We were able to do resume building, in addition to digital services. And I'm very excited that, we are one of the first states that also roll out a Coursera platform. And Coursera is basically, about 4,000 courses that are available for people to take, while at home. And they are curated courses that provide immediate, some of them have certification programs, all free of charge for all residents in our state, with a focus on those who are displaced workers. And so certifications and this program will continue until 2021. March of 2021, and number of success stories, coming out of the Coursera platform, in which people are taking, whether it's IT courses, construction, that are someone can complete in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, on 4 weeks, and we have a lot of employers who are looking for those type of skill sets gained through the training provided by Coursera, programs. If you can go to the next slide, or is this the last slide? Yeah, this one. So that's more on the workforce side. On the economic development side, most of I think that, the emergency loan program instituted by our agency, $30 million, $28 million of that went straight to businesses. And I'm very happy to report that, for the first time, we have a significant portion of the funding going to businesses owned by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Close to 1/3 of the funds went to businesses that are owned by BIPOC community members. The PP program also is one that did really an uptake, and a lot of communities benefited from it. Some of the programs, are managed by SBA, and so it's not directly with DEED, but we were able to provide the information through our weekly community meetings and weekly partnership meetings that we have. And I know we're short on time, but you can find more details on the link that I provided here, both for the loans as well as the training programs that we have. The big question I'm sure everyone is, have in mind is, what's going to happen to the $600 income, from the PUA program. And the latest we have heard is that, it's still ongoing discussion. The program expires this week. In fact, it has already expired technically, but the last payment, goes out, I think, Friday this week. So by July 31, the additional $600 benefit will stop. Even if Congress reauthorizes that, there will be a gap between continuation of the program and starting. What we're hearing is that it's unlikely we will see additional 600. We might see a reduced amounts. But as I mentioned, I think we were the second state in the country that implemented the PUA program successfully. So we have the infrastructure in place, and so whatever comes out of this latest CARES Act, we will be able to immediately roll out for the benefit of the communities. For those who are looking for services, on our website, you can find a ton of information on support services for those that are coming off of the $600 benefits. And that includes, services that are provided by other state agencies as well as community providers. So more information to come. I want to now turn over to the next speaker and look forward to the conversations and the questions and answers at the end. Thank you.
Nikki? Nikki Farrago.
She just signed off. She'll probably be signing back on in 1 second.
Okay.
So I'm happy to take advantage of that minute.
Go ahead, you got it.
I mean, do you guys want me to dance for that minute until she joins, or do you want me to? Here we go. Okay, great. No, I think if you can go back to the first slide, if that's okay. Yeah. So on this one, I would like to also just emphasize is the importance of multi-pronged approach to communication. And as someone who's an immigrant and Black, one of the first challenges I had as an employee and a leader at a state agency is finding my voice in the communication of state agencies. And so I just want to say that we were able to institute diverse perspectives in our communication platforms. So we engaged community-owned ethnic media, print, social media programs, rather social media platforms used by BIPOC, so that we can reach out to the communities that often might not see traditional mainstream media communication announcements and news. And so, I mean, I can go into details, but in the interest of time, if someone is interested in how we're approaching communications to reach diverse population, is happy to share that as well.
Thank you for giving us that additional information. And now Nikki's up.
Hi, everyone. Good to be with you today. I'm Nikki Farrago. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Children and Family Services at the Department of Human Services. As the largest state agency, it covers a lot. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of information about the programs that are in my administration. We have a wide variety of programs, I think the most diverse across the agency, including our child support, child protection and permanency, our child care services, refugee services, cash and food supports, and then our grant programs through our Office of Economic Opportunity. And on behalf of Commissioner Harpstead, who of course has a close connection to the nonprofit community, I just wanted to thank the United Way for hosting this forum. The work of nonprofits is so critical to the work that we do at DHS. And you partner with us in every area that I just mentioned. And of course, much further than my administration. So I'm just going to dive in a little bit to talk about what we're doing in response to COVID, and hopefully answer some of those questions that we got ahead of time as I do that. So when COVID hit back in March, it became clear pretty quickly that we needed to have a response ready for the partners that we work with. So as a state supervised and county and tribe administrated system that also works with many community partners, we needed to have some communication to figure out what was needed and where we needed to be flexible. And that established our waivers. So we put together a robust system where we were meeting initially daily, presenting ideas and proposals for policy changes on what could make things easier. And initially that was a lot of tele everything is kind of what we were talking about at the time. So how could we start to take MFIP applications over the phone, for example? Or how could we do child protection visits somehow virtually? Was it safe to do that? So we were talking through all of these issues and working with counties and tribes and also our federal partners on a lot of these things to figure out what the best way forward was. And we also, knowing that we see disparities in many of our programs across DHS for BIPOC. And that was a concern as we began the waiver process, that we didn't want to exacerbate poor outcomes in our programs. And we actually wanted to improve those outcomes through the waivers that we were employing through the executive order and Commissioner Harpstead's authority. And then second, we were looking at what were those funding supports that were out there. Some resources came from the state legislature. Other resources that followed were largely from the federal government. So an example of that is our child care programs. So we know that child care already operates as an industry, operates on a really thin margin. And they do such important work. They take care of our littlest Minnesotans across the state. So what we did was we worked with the state legislature back in March to establish the Peacetime Emergency Child Care Grant Program. So schools were able to provide care for their district enrolled school age children for those tier 1 sectors. And we needed to figure out what to do with our kids younger than 5. So what we ended up doing was the governor and lieutenant governor requested state funds to provide those grants to child care programs and providers that agreed to prioritize space for children of essential workers at the time. We worked with the Children's Cabinet and Child Care Aware of Minnesota to develop the program, and consulted with many of our leaders at the legislature across the country, and also utilize our expertise of our providers here at home. So that was for our state licensed family child care programs and our child care centers and our tribally licensed programs. And in round 3 of the grants, we expanded eligibility for our nonprofit certified child care centers who were caring for those school age children, but we were heading into summer and knew that they needed some of that care as well. So that was a total of, we pushed out about $10 million each month for 3 months. And then in the final month, added $10 million from the CARES Act funding that we got. And for a total of about $40 million that was distributed for that program. The grant sizes were on the low end for a small family child care provider, $4,500. And then for our largest centers, it was $21,000. And then as the peacetime emergency progressed and the stay-at-home order ended, it was clear that we needed more supports to keep child care programs open. So we had focused on those children of essential workers, but now we were looking at those non-essential workers returning to workplaces, and also child care providers being faced with the additional burden of following the public health guidance to prevent the spread of COVID within their businesses. And we also had heard out of our lessons learned in the first grant program that we needed to do something for all providers. So the peacetime emergency grants were a competitive grant program, did not meet the need. We were able to fund roughly a third of what we needed to. So with this program, we decided that the grants would be somewhat smaller, but they would be for everybody that was eligible and that applied. So that program was stood up and started in July to pick up where the previous one had left off. It was $56.6 million in federal funds. And we're projecting actually that we're going to spend about $52 million of that total funding. We got feedback from our provider community again, and worked with our other leaders and the legislature to ensure that that we were hitting the mark in this sense on this program. And those checks are actually starting to go out this week. As of day before yesterday, we had distributed $17.5 million of that CRF funds to over 7,000 child care programs in this first month. And as I was saying, that'll that'll estimate till about $52 million by the end of September. And so for family child care providers, the amounts are $1,200 per month, $8,500 per month for centers, and then $8,500 per month for our nonprofit certified centers. So I want to talk a little bit more about the waivers. So our waiver authorities are rooted in the executive order passed by the governor, and also looking at our state statutes. So, but sometimes we also have waivers for our federal statutes, depending on the program. The first special session of the 2020 legislature extended several of our DHS waivers and programs beyond the end of the peacetime emergency by giving us a 60-day, what we're calling an off-ramp or a grace period, so that we don't have to stand up our programs and get back to business as usual overnight. Because as we know, there's not a lot of lead time, and it's unknown when we're going to be getting an extension of those peacetime emergencies until usually the day that they happen. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't putting our partners and ultimately the people we serve in a really tough spot. And I think 60 days can sound like plenty of time, but when we start to untangle some of those really complicated pieces, we know that a good portion of that time is needed to plan and notify the counties, tribes, and our partners of how we're going to proceed. We also have modifications that are tied to the end of the federal emergency and our federal waiver authority. And we're beginning to see some of that now as we begin recertifying our cash and food programs for September. So SNAP, our food support program, was utilizing a waiver that was delaying recertifications that needed to take place during the spring. And we got word that other states were getting denied for continuation of this waiver. So with that, the writing was kind of on the wall. I will say we haven't received an official denial yet for September benefits for the recertification delay, but we expect to at this point. We're working with our federal delegation, with the USDA to continue that waiver, but we're still hopeful, but preparing in the meantime to restart those recertifications for SNAP, MFIP, and our other cash support programs. We did within that work with our federal partners to extend some other waivers that would help. So again, some of those tele everything pieces. So one is allowing community organizations to assist with phone applications for those cash and food programs and for SNAP. And so that's just one, I think, one example of how complex our waivers are going to be to untie, and knowing all the work that went in to many of them. I believe DHS has over 90 waivers at this point. And I apologize, I didn't send this ahead of time, but we do have a website on the DHS website that shows all of our waivers and modifications laid out for you to look at. And some of our waivers that we've been utilizing are actually providing better services for our clients. That's probably not a surprise. Because it's removing some of the barriers that we've always heard about. So while those changes, some require legislative changes, we are interested in hearing from all of our stakeholders, including all of you, about what you think is working and what you think is worth keeping. So I'm going to move a little bit to, I got a licensing question, which is not in my purview, but I wanted to respond to it, was about guidance for community education and park-based programs. So knowing that those need to be in compliance with both DHS and MDE. So on the DHS side, the short answer is, if there are any questions about whether your program is in compliance, call the DHS licensing provider hotline. We have a provider hotline posted online that you can utilize. And there's also across the health department has a list of documentation providing some guidance organized by industry. And there's a particular one on guidance for youth, student, and childcare programs that talks about kind of those summer camps, those day programs, education programs, and things like that, about how to social distance, how to create a plan, a decision tree for infection, and things like that. That DHS has been working with the Department of Health and the Department of Education to pull those together. And then in the space of child protection, you know, another issue that came to light pretty quickly was we have foster youth that are primarily, at first, they were on college campuses. And how do we make sure that they're doing okay, and where they are and what supports that they need? So we got a question about extended foster care benefits. So we have many who are on extended foster care. You can be on foster care up to age 21 here in Minnesota. We've taken advantage of that through the federal guidance. And what we've done is we've reached out to each one of those foster youth that turned 21 earlier in the spring. We're getting ready to do another iteration of that for those that turned 21 over the summer. But we had a handful of youth, about 31 youth that were in that category, to make sure that if they were eligible for benefits or services, that they were able to access them, that those that were already transitioning were doing that successfully. And then identifying where we had youth that needed additional supports to be helpful.
Nikki, thank you so much. We have a few questions.
Sure.
And if we can go to the questions, and then if we have some time, we can resume with some of your questions that you were presented with. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Excellent. Anthony, can you start with the questions that have been submitted?
Sure. The first question I'm going to direct to Ryan. In the chat box, the questions read, $100 million is available to Minnesotans struggling to keep up with rents and mortgages. How will these people access those funds?
Yeah, great question. So for the COVID housing assistance program, we're doing a couple of things that we hope will streamline access. One is having a statewide referral system, call in an initial eligibility, and then a connection to a local administrator. So it'll all be accessed locally, but there'll be hopefully a funnel at the top to direct people who's administering the program locally in their community, depending on what maybe a housing assistance they're looking for. And then the other thing is we're exploring an online web-based application so that people could also just apply online and direct it to a local administrator. So we're trying to make a couple different options to make it to easier for people to access.
Thank you. I have another question for you. It says evictions and moratoriums and funding for emergency renters assistance could all run out in the winter. What can you share about conversations that may be happening to prevent additional increases in unsheltered and homelessness during some of our harshest months, and to promote long-term housing stability?
The state of Minnesota's executive order is tied to the governor's peacetime emergencies, which are coming up every 30 days. So I do want to make sure that the question knows that the federal eviction moratorium is slated to end. I think they're now in a 30-day waiting period, but Minnesota has an eviction moratorium that, I get it, is tenuous month to month, but is still in place. As it relates to some of the conversations, that we're having. There was an announcement yesterday about some additional shelter capacity, specifically in the city of Minneapolis. So there are a number of efforts specifically around people sleeping outside. The $100 million is meant to trying to be targeted to help stabilize people and get people caught up on their bills so that they aren't displaced or potentially evicted if the moratorium were to end. And then there's also longer term strategies actually with Minnesota Housing, DHS, and the Department of Employment and Economic Development around some of the new community development block grant funds that came from the federal legislation to try to use those in housing and homelessness in ways that the state hasn't. So as I talked about, we need more than what we have. We know that families are struggling to pay, but those are the main efforts. I should also say right now we're working aggressively at the federal level because the federal government has not passed anything directly for housing assistance. And I think that's pretty unbelievable. So we're focusing at the state level, but also hoping Congress acts before they go on August recess for additional resources.
Thank you, Ryan. I have one more question for you, but I'll get to it later. I want to give the other two guests the opportunity to answer a couple of questions they have. Hamza, it says a question for you. It says hourly school employees are not eligible for unemployment. They face fiscal cliff if schools don't reopen. Can Indeed help these bus drivers and food service workers?
Yeah, I mean, as an agency, you know, the two roles we have is policy recommendation and policy implementation. And so I'm not an expert on all UI related, but I can tell you anyone who is currently eligible in the current, law is, is eligible, and a lot of people have applied. I know some school workers that are, beneficiaries of the UI program. But I can tell you there's number of groups in our community that is pushing for some legislative change so that more people would benefit from UI. An example of that is youth who are in high school and might have already been working, but yet they're not eligible for UI. So some of those discussions, are in the legislative session. I don't anticipate, in the August session that this will move forward. I can look at it and get back to you. Sorry, I'm going blank, Jennifer. But if I'd like to follow, because this one's a little tricky. I know some school workers who are eligible and already applied and are on the UI benefits system. But those who are not, I think it probably relates to a policy, some of the policy discussions that are happening now. So happy to follow up with more details.
Thank you. I have another question that may be directed towards you. So let me ask you really quickly. It says most, if not all, of the aid that has come through small businesses has not fit a nonprofit model. Are there efforts to create fund relief options that are more specifically tailored to the needs of nonprofits, in particular those that are struggling to maintain critical social services?
Yeah, I mean, this is the especially in the workforce training, nonprofit providers, this has been really one of the biggest challenges. I know, we recently, it's still not official from the feds, but we might have some access to CARES Act funding for nonprofits that provide workforce training. But more broadly, we haven't seen much of a uptake from policymakers in terms of additional funding for nonprofits. PPP and some of the other programs certainly are nonprofits are eligible. So I remain maybe hopeful that it will be in the next congressional bill to be done soon. But currently, we were able to do things that were within our discretion. So, for example, for our nonprofit providers at Indeed, we were able to extend grants, for additional year, and sometimes, made some budget modifications. We made an offer to do 10% upfront, cash advancement for nonprofits. So we're doing the things that are within our, preview and discretion. But outside of that, this is more of a legislative discussion. My understanding is, going back to the earlier question that, nonprofits and, schools are in the mix of, things being discussed now in this federal legislation, discussion. So I think more to come on that front.
Thank you. The next question I have for Nikki. The question reads, will there be support/grants to help households and communities access the internet, especially needed now for job searching, remote work, and distance learning?
So I don't know that we've heard that need as of yet. So I'm trying to think where we would establish a grant program like that. I feel like we would be working with our partners at the Department of Education to set up the distance learning piece. And of course, we could talk with our employment service providers too about the need for that as well. But I haven't heard that, but I can take that back.
Thank you. I have another question for Ryan. Will there be coordination with MDOR, which administers the Property Tax Refund Renters Credit Program, and could communicate with landlords and renters who complete the tax filing forms for promotion, marketing, driving to regional administrators, and/or online applications?
Thanks for the question. I don't know, honestly, what Department of Revenue does for their outreach currently. I know they do have some outreach targeted towards landlords and renters, but I can follow up, or you can follow up with me directly. My email is basically my name at state.mn.us, and I can get you an answer with the Department of Revenue.
Thank you. Ryan, I have another question for you. Are people without citizenship status eligible beneficiaries of this funding? And it also says in orgs helping them to keep their homes through COVID.
Sure. So this is a question about the $100 million COVID housing assistance program. So to qualify for the program, individuals or households will need to verify that they're a Minnesota resident, that they've fallen behind on their rent, mortgage, or other housing related bill, and that they meet the income requirements. Outside of potential geographic limitation for our administrators, there won't be any other eligibility requirements permitted.
Thank you. Nikki, I have a question for you. Are we seeing impacts on child care providers? What steps are being taken to ensure child care continues to be available for those families that need it?
Yeah, it's a great question because we know that child care is really the backbone of getting our economy back up and running. If families can't go back to work, then we're going to be in a bad way. So, and if kids don't have a healthy and safe place to be, they're gonna struggle. So, you know, I would say the two grant programs that I talked about in my comments, that's what we heard from childcare providers that they needed an influx of funding support to stay afloat, to deal with the reduction in enrollments. And we asked providers to stay open to support families, and we got I'm just inspired by how many were willing to do that and to take on that risk. Additionally, through our child care assistance program, we've employed some flexibilities, such as taking away some of the administrative hoops to claim absent days for children that are in care. Paying closed providers, we normally would not pay a provider that's closed, but if you're closed for a period of time, you can actually get CCAP reimbursement for that time period.
Thank you. And this will be my last question. And Hamza, it will be for you, please. What steps has DEED taken to provide greater flexibility for its state grants? Is this flexibility automatic, or do organizations need to work with DEED directly?
Yeah, this is for our existing grantees. So the law allows us to extend grants one time for 1 year. So if a grantee has not already used that one-time grant extension, we're able to do that, and we have done many of those already. I think we got about 82 grant extension budget modification requests. There were few that were not eligible for it because they have already received grant extension, in 2019. And so there has been attempts, to maybe get two-time extension policy change. And that was in the, we had so many special sessions. Now I lost track of it. I think it was the first one that we had in which we tried to change that, and it did not successfully made it to the final discussions. But I know that's still in conversation, and those are for organizations that received the 1 year, one-time extension, and I think there were a few organizations who were under that category. Most of the other grantees were able to receive grant extension from DEED, and those are in the workforce development, employment training program grantees. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you all for your time and answering those questions so thoroughly. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much. And Kristen, take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Leslie. So again, my name's Kristen Rosenberger, and I'm the Senior Advocacy Manager at Greater Twin Cities United Way. And I just like to take the moment to thank everyone for joining us today for this important discussion, including our many, many nonprofit partners, our staff, and community members. I'd also like to extend a thank you to Patrick Tanis and Kristen Beckman at the Governor's Office for bringing our agency partners together to join us today. And we certainly couldn't have hosted this event without their support. And then certainly I want to extend a very special thank you to Ryan, Hamza, and Nikki for sharing your time, your expertise, and some really candid and practical guidance to help simplify a slate of very complicated regulations and requirements that are still continuing to evolve. So thank you. I think it's really important. Conversations like this reflect the power of relationships and the importance of United Way listening to all of you, bringing our partners together to ask questions and engage in an open dialogue and robust discussion. And this really allows us all to become more informed, to work more effectively, to make our communities stronger, particularly during these really unprecedented times. We'll be going ahead and sharing the links and resource documents provided by our speakers for those of you looking for additional information on specific topics. And so I encourage you to stay on the lookout for future United Way newsletters, to check the grantee portal periodically to find updates on advocacy and other pertinent topics. And as the Senior Advocacy Manager, as a last shameless plug, I'd like to ask that you join us in our advocacy work and consider joining United Way's Advocacy Network. We've been working very hard to help advance funding for emergency housing assistance this session, which Ryan talked about and we're extremely excited about. in addition to addressing longer-term policy issues like eviction reforms, access to childcare, and improved workforce systems. You know, as Hamza mentioned, there's a lot of legislation that could still be passed to make some improvements to the funding and to the programs that we're seeing right now in the processes. So we ask for your engagement. Also during today's conversation, we talked about a lack of funding specific to nonprofits, which is another area we've been advocating. So we have a joint proposal that we've been working with in partnership with others to create a nonprofit recovery fund. Its purpose is to support longer-term needs by the nonprofits to more effectively serve their communities through 2021. We know that even if the peacetime emergency ends, we know that community needs will remain high for some time, but yet this is be a time when nonprofit resources are an all-time low. So we can certainly use your support to make this happen. So again, I welcome you to join us to advance more equitable and meaningful systems change. And you can easily sign up on our website at gtcuw.org. When you find our advocacy page. So without much more ado, thank you again to all of our attendees for joining us today, and I wish you a wonderful afternoon.